On today's show, realistic Houston Rockets trade targets that will help them win right now without mortgaging the future. It's all coming up on today's Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Thursdays. Be sure to follow along wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, where the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Drop us a comment while you're there. Give us your hypothetical trade scenarios for the Rockets this season. Also subscribe to our new daily Locked On Rockets newsletter. Would sincerely appreciate that. We're up to 6th across all the teams for the Locked On Network. We are in 6th place in subscriber count. We're still trailing the Dallas Mavericks, though, and that upsets me. So we got to crank those numbers up. I really appreciate you guys for doing that. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you so much for being an everydayer. On today's show, we are putting our GM hats on and we're firing up the trade machine and taking a look at some moves that the Houston Rockets could make this season to help the team win games right here, right now, without mortgaging the future or impacting their ability to make a bigger, splashier deal down the line. Case in point, next summer when potentially some star level players could ultimately shake loose that the Rockets might be interested in. So I want to preface this by starting with, Rafael Stone was on Sirius XM radio the other day, basically saying, we're very happy with our team and we're not trying to make any moves. And I would be shocked if we did make a move. And people were like, why would you be shocked? You're the GM. Like, you're the guy who makes the move. It's all a bunch of GM hullabaloo. Like, whenever GMs do interviews like this, they basically say a whole lot of nothing. It's basically a lot of, we're not looking to make any moves, but if a move is there, we'll make it. So it's basically, we're not going to do anything unless we do something. So it's hard to really infer anything from that. Now, I will say that everything that I've understood about where the Houston Rockets are at, right, is they have been incredibly patient. They want to give all the young guys time to grow and mesh and develop together. And they're not looking to necessarily mortgage any of the futures of the young core yet. They're not at that point yet. So the trades that we are going to be focusing on today are realistic trades that the Rockets could entertain this season to bring in winning rotation caliber players, a couple of whom might be legitimate starting caliber guys, bring them in this season without impeding their ability to make trades and deals and moves down the line to bring in that big fish to help them level up and get from being, this ragtag, Cinderella story, upstart competitive squad that they are this year into legitimate contender territory next season. So the trades that we're going to start, let me also lead in with this information. The reason we're looking at these trades is because the Houston Rockets have an abundance of expiring salary on their payroll right now as we speak. They've got 3 players who are on straight up expiring contracts in Steven Adams, Jeff Green, and Jae'Sean Tate. Steven Adams makes $12.6 million, Jeff Green makes $8 million, and Jae'Sean Tate makes $7.5 million. So just those 3 contracts alone, that's $28.1 million in expiring salary falling off the books at the end of this season. You've got to find a way to take advantage of at least those 3 guys and do something with them at the deadline if the intention is not to keep them on the roster past this season. Past those 2 guys, there are 2 more names on the roster in Aaron Holiday, who makes $4.6 million this season, and he makes $4.9 next season on a team option. So he's effectively another expiring deal with team control. And then Jock Landale, who makes $8 million a year every year for the next 3 years. However, every single season of Jock's contract is non-guaranteed. So basically, every year functions as a team option. Between those 5 players, it amounts to about a little over $40 million in expiring salary that the Houston Rockets can aggregate and put together and just blast at whatever target they would want to potentially pursue ahead of this year's NBA trade deadline in order to bolster the team's chances this season. Now, the reason we're having this discussion too is because it doesn't happen every year that your team starts out this strong, that the Rockets are playing basketball this well, and you want to be able to take advantage of it because for all we know, this team could easily regress next season. They might not be as good. Maybe an injury happens. You never know in the NBA landscape, right? So it makes sense to take advantage of this opportunity, to take advantage of where the Houston Rockets are at this year, especially with pieces or contracts that aren't necessarily staple members of the rotation. Yes, we've seen a little bit of Steven Adams and Jock Landale this season. Yes, we've seen a little bit of Aaron Holiday in a pinch. But for the most part, all 5 of those contracts are very easily movable pieces, and none of them should be viewed as absolute staples of the Houston Rockets rotation to this point. So let's start with the first name on this list, a name that we talked about a little bit earlier this season, and I definitely jumped the gun when I was bringing this up, and it was because the Rockets were down bad with their shooting woes, and that name is Cam Johnson for the Brooklyn Nets. The Nets are clearly now approaching their fire sale mode. They're definitely one of the sellers, quote unquote, ahead of the NBA trade deadline. They just moved off of Dennis Schroeder, who was playing amazing basketball for them, and they got rid of him for 2 second-round draft picks to the Golden State Warriors. So the Nets are clearly in sell everything mode. They're trying to move on from guys. They want to recoup as much value as they possibly can, obviously. And I do think a guy like Cam Johnson or potentially even a Nick Claxton type, those guys are going to fetch you quite a bit more than a Dennis Schroeder ultimately will. But those are 2 names, not just Cam Johnson, but both Cam Johnson and Nick Claxton are 2 very interesting names for the Rockets to consider. Now, the Nick Claxton one is a little bit harder to stomach because he does make quite a bit more than Cam Johnson does. Nick Claxton is making $27.5 million this season. Cam Johnson's only making $22.5 million. And Cam's contract's weird. It goes 22.5, then 20.5, then back up to 22.5. So only 3 seasons. Nick Claxton's under contract for 4 seasons, but it is on descending value. So it's 27.5, then 25.3, then 23.1, then 20.9 in the final year. But for both of these guys, they both have merit. They both have, ways to impact and improve this Rockets team if the Rockets wanted to try and jettison some of their expiring salary towards them and forego a couple future draft assets. Now, the most that I'd go for Cam Johnson, right, is I think he's worthy of, 1, maybe 2 assets tops. And you have to consider that expiring contracts, the salary relief that they provide, getting out from under that Cam Johnson contract, if you're the Nets, that in and of itself can be viewed as an asset going back by way of a trade. So maybe the salary relief plus 1 first-round pick, or maybe at most 2 first-round picks in the future would be enough for Brooklyn to consider it. And again, the Rockets have so many different ways of mixing and matching some of these salaries to be able to make a trade ultimately happen. And Cam Johnson fits perfectly into what the Rockets are doing. He's a scorer. He can put the ball in the basket. That's been the Rockets' biggest issue this entire season, is having consistent, reliable scoring, especially on the perimeter. Alperen Sengun has been the Rockets' most consistent player, or the most consistent source of offense for the Rockets this season. Even when he has his down games, he still facilitates, he still collapses the defense from the middle of the floor and generates these kick-out opportunities for shooters. The Rockets just don't have enough shooters. They don't have enough guys that can knock down these outside shots. So Cam Johnson gives you a bona fide scorer. He's not just a guy who stands at the three-point line. He's a legit. He can put the ball on the floor. He can pull up from 2. He can slash to the basket a little bit. He's lengthy. He's got a little bit of size. He's a competent enough defender to fit into an Ime Udoka-led team. It would be an almost seamless fit. And if you could get him without giving up any of the core rotation guys, then you could very easily see a world where you just slide him into the starting lineup. You could easily move Jalen Green into a bench role. I feel like that's going to rub a lot of people the wrong way, but given how he's performed so far this season, And I know that Fred has also not performed very well this season. Fred's numbers are down across the board, but Fred also provides a level of defense and leadership and stability and ball security and all these things that Jalen doesn't provide at this point. If one of them is going to be moved to the bench at any point this season, in any trade that brings in a potential starting caliber player, it's going to be Jalen Green at this point. That's just the facts at this point. So Cam Johnson could slot in beautifully into this Rockets team, and you could easily combine. You could do Steven Adams and Jayshawn Tate to get up there salary-wise. You could do Steven Adams and Jeff Green to get up there. You could, if you wanted to hold on to Steven Adams, you can do Jeff Green, Jayshawn Tate, and Aaron Holiday. There's so many different permutations of how the Houston Rockets can get there salary-wise to match Cam Johnson and be able to bring him to Houston, as long as, again, they don't touch any of the other members of the young core. And even if you wanted to take it a step further, maybe you're not super high on Cam Whitmore's future, potentially, right? And maybe the Nets are asking about him. How far would you go? Would you include Cam Whitmore and maybe a first-round pick in a trade for Cam Johnson in order to bolster the Rockets' chances of winning this season and adding a legitimate top 8, top 9 rotation piece to the roster for years to come? Is that a worthwhile trade, given that, Cam, as talented as we've seen him be and as much upside as he potentially has, this Rockets team is now moving from the developmental stage of giving the young guys time to grow and coalesce and develop together into the, hey, we're a competitive team, we're winning basketball games right now, we need to start thinking about making win now moves. And unfortunately, Cam might be an unfortunate casualty of just the acceleration of this Houston Rockets rebuild. Ultimately, we're seeing it happen with Reed Sheppard too. He's still getting minutes this season, but obviously in crunch time and in big games, Ime Udoka is trusting Aaron Holiday over Reed Sheppard. And hopefully Reed's development isn't stunted because of that. He's still getting plenty of opportunity, but we're seeing the Rockets in a very precarious spot when it comes to a couple of the guys that are, still fresher on the development scale in Reed and Cam, not necessarily getting the run that they would be getting on other worse teams that didn't have the high postseason aspirations that this Rockets team currently has. So Cam Johnson, interesting name to keep an eye on if you're the Rockets. Maybe there's a deal there where it's Cam Johnson and Nick Claxton coming back to Houston, but that's a lot of salary to move around mid-season. You're talking about a trade somewhere in the $49.5 million range, $50 million range. The Rockets would at that point have to include one more contract, one more top-end guy, one of the core 7 to be able to make the math work at that point, which is probably not worth it. So Cam Johnson, a realistic target, and because the Nets are clearly fire selling stuff, you might be able to get him relatively cheaply. Maybe just a first-round pick might get the deal done, and the Rockets do still own the future swap with the Brooklyn Nets all the way out in, 2027? Yeah, the 2027 first-round pick swap. So maybe just relinquishing the swap and then giving them a first-round pick in this upcoming draft would be enough to get that deal done. What do you think about that trade? Coming up, we got a few more names that we're going to get into. My personal favorite, Zack LaVine, plus a couple other guys to discuss in this hypothetical trade podcast. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Look, Game Time is the best ticket buying experience on the marketplace. You're trying to go to a Rockets home game? Get on Game Time. Get yourself some tickets. It's going to be so easy. They've got their Game Time picks to filter out the fluff to only show you incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of different ticketing offers, but they've got so many other amazing features as well, like their Game Time ticket covers, their lowest price guarantee, views from your seat, so you know exactly what to expect when you roll up to Toyota Center or any other venue for that matter. They got concert tickets, theater tickets, all sorts of stuff on there. My personal favorite is their all-in pricing. When you toggle on the all-in pricing feature in the Game Time app, it shows you the price from start to finish. They're fully transparent. They don't hit you with the hidden fees or any of that BS along the way. It's awesome. So take the guesswork out of buying your tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Today's episode is brought to you by Rocket Money. Look, We've all been there, unfortunately. I hate to admit it, but it's happened to me. You have a subscription service that you signed up for, and maybe you forgot to cancel, got through the free trial, and then you started getting hit with the fees, and you check your bank statement, you're like, oh, I don't even remember paying for this, right? Get rid of those unwanted subscriptions with Rocket Money. It's a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together in one spot, whether it's subscriptions, your spending habits, or even the goals that you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. For me, the best feature is just the subscription tracker, right? I can't tell you the number of times that I've signed up for a free service or something and just forgotten about it, and then I see a couple hits later and I'm like, okay, my bad, I should have canceled it, all that good stuff. Rocket Money helps you deal with all of that. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon. rocketmoney.com/lockedon. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, so a name that I've mentioned a couple different times now in doing a couple of these crossovers leading up to, as part of the Houston Rockets NBA Cup run, when asked about the Rockets' offensive struggles, their shooting woes, I've responded, I've said that Zack LaVine is a very interesting trade target for the Rockets. Now, unfortunately, there is some reporting out there that the Denver Nuggets are also very heavily interested in Zack LaVine, so the Rockets might actually have a little bit of competition to secure Zack LaVine now, so it might not be as easy to acquire him as it may have been a couple weeks ago, but Zack LaVine is still widely viewed as one of the worst contracts in the NBA right now. He's making $43 million this season. He makes just under $46 million next season, and then he's got a player option in the final year of his contract for $48.9 million. That is a ton of money to pay to a two-guard that hasn't ever really been able to be the best player on a team and has also battled some injuries throughout his career, unfortunately. That being said, so far this season, Zack LaVine, relatively healthy, and he's actually putting up really, really solid numbers. He's shooting 50% from the floor right now, just under 43% from downtown, and from the charity stripe? 80% at the free throw line, right? So 50, 43, 80 shooting splits, and he's averaging just under 22 points a game. Zack LaVine would be everything that this Houston Rockets team desperately needs offensively this season. If Jalen Green was putting up Zack LaVine numbers right now as the starting two guard for the Rockets would be the number one team in the Western Conference, and it'd be one of the best teams they're still one of the best teams in the NBA, despite not having the consistent offensive production from Jalen Green. But you look at those numbers for Zack LaVine and you envision him in a Houston Rockets jersey where, Zack LaVine may not ever be, not even may not ever be, he's never going to be the best guy, the number one player on a championship contender. But the way that this Houston Rockets team operates, the way that they have this equal opportunity offense, and on any given night, maybe it's Sengun's night, Dylan's night, Jalen, Fred, Jabari, whoever, they just need one guy who can at least be the consistent perimeter scoring threat in order to complement Alperen Sengun in his game and to run a more consistent two-man game with him, especially in crunch time of a close game. Zack LaVine gives you that. The numbers back it up. And if you were able to plug Zack LaVine into this Houston Rockets system, you slide Jalen Green to the bench, this Rockets team would immediately ascend into another level of competitiveness. They'd be in the same conversation as the Oklahoma City Thunder, as the Dallas Mavericks, as the Cleveland Cavaliers, as the Boston Celtics. I am confident in making that claim because that's been the Rockets' Achilles heel all season long. They have the defense. They have the ability to stop other teams. They're the number 2 defense in the entire NBA. Their biggest weakness has been their inability to generate consistent offense. Let me back that up. It's not even their inability to generate consistent quality offense because they do generate wide open shots. Now, part of the reason that they probably generate so many wide open shots is because other teams just flat out don't respect the Rockets shooters. They'd much rather send double and triple teams to Alperen Sengun and pack the paint to close off driving lanes for Jalen and for Fred rather than closing out hard on shooters because it just doesn't matter. The Rockets can't hit outside shots. That's the scouting report on Houston right now. So if you add Zack LaVine into the mix, if you slot him into the starting 2-guard spot next to Fred VanVleet, and you give the Rockets a efficient 22 points per game, a knockdown 3-point shooter, a guy who will absolutely make defenses pay by doubling Sengun or by trying to pack the paint and not honing in on the perimeter threat that is a Zack LaVine type, this Rockets team would ascend. And it's really, it might be a little bit harder to get him now if the Nuggets and potentially other teams are maybe interested in acquiring him. I still am unsure how the Nuggets would even go about piecing together all the salary to get him. But from a Rockets perspective, again, they've got more than enough expiring salary in all 5 of those contracts that we talked about in segment 1 to get up to just under $41 million, which is enough to match the salary of Zack LaVine this season. So you trade for him, and then you fire off all 5 of those guys. This is the tricky part about doing a trade this size mid-season. You would be required to incorporate a third and possibly even a 4th team into the trade because the Bulls can't accept a 5-for-1 trade mid-season. You have to have the requisite roster spots available before cementing a trade for any, or before, cementing a transaction or whatever. So the Bulls would have to have 4 additional roster spots because Zack LaVine counts as one of the 5 spots. You would have to have 4 additional roster spots available in order to absorb all 5 of the contracts coming from Houston. So what the Rockets would have to do and what the Bulls would have to do is they'd have to factor in a 3rd and possibly a 4th or even a 5th team to be able to send some of these other contracts to. You send Aaron Holiday to one team, you send Jock Landale to one team, you send another guy another team. Basically, the Rockets would have to send all this outgoing salary elsewhere without receiving any additional salary back, and then Zack LaVine comes straight to Houston. It's a little bit trickier, it's a little bit harder to pull off mid-season, but it's still a possibility. And if you can get Zack LaVine without foregoing any of the young core, if you can acquire him and all it takes is the expiring salary and maybe a future first-round pick, because again, that contract is not viewed very favorably. It's viewed as one of the worst contracts in the association right now, and the Bulls are very clearly tanking. They want to bottom out. They waited way too long to try and figure out what they're doing and how they're going to move off some of the, the core rotation pieces that they do have, and so now they're in a position where they're going to have to sell Zack LaVine at a loss. They're not going to get much for him, if at all. And if the Rockets are in a potential bidding war with the Denver Nuggets, that does potentially jack up the price a little bit. But at the same time, you look at what he could provide to this Houston Rockets team. You look at what their biggest weaknesses are right now this season, and it feels like Zack LaVine checks every single box on that list. And on top of that, Zack LaVine isn't a guy who's been looked at as a good defender throughout his career, but Ime Udoka turned Jalen Green and Alperen Sengun into absolutely plus-tier defenders, right? If he can do that for those guys, then he can absolutely get Zack LaVine to a place where he's at least a net neutral defensively and not getting picked on or not a liability on the defensive end. Plus, we've never seen Zack LaVine play on a team that's as good as this Houston Rockets team. He played on the Wolves for years while they were middling with Karl-Anthony Towns and whatnot, and then he has played for the Bulls, and he really hasn't been on a team as good as this Rockets team. So I think putting him in a winning environment with the numbers that he brings offensively would help alleviate a lot of the pressure on the Rockets offensively, and it would take some of that pressure away from Alperen Sengun and allow him a little bit more space to operate in the paint. It would open things up for other guys. It would clear some driving lanes because defenses would have to actually honor one of the perimeter scoring threats that the Rockets have rather than just conceding wide open threes constantly to Jalen and Fred on the perimeter. It makes so much sense in my mind. And if I could rub a magic lamp and have the Rockets make one trade ahead of this NBA trade deadline, it would be a move to include all these expiring deals for Zack LaVine. That would be the move that puts the Rockets over the top this season. And despite what it seems like with that albatross contract of Zack LaVine making $43 million, and he'd still be making 45 plus for the next couple seasons, it seems like an ugly contract. It seems like a really steep price to pay. He's still a really, really solid player. And even though you're overpaying for that solid player, I don't think that move would inhibit the Rockets' ability down the line to be able to make a swing for a true star level player in order to potentially down the line replace ideally, right, Fred VanVleet, who's already on the wrong side of 30. And yes, Fred has brought a lot to this Houston Rockets team, but in our next episode, we're going to visit and we're going to take a look at a couple of the names that the Houston Rockets are rumored to have interest in, and that I know that they are definitely taking a hard look at and will be paying close attention to this upcoming offseason. Those names are De'Aaron Fox and Devin Booker. And if you do have Zach LaVine on the roster, I don't think it prevents you from going after either of those guys down the line. And we're going to break that all down in a future episode. But I really like the Zach LaVine possibility. I think it's easily the best move that the Rockets could make to elevate the team this season without, again, mortgaging their future. I want your thoughts on it, though. How would you feel about the Rockets going after Zach LaVine? Let me know in the YouTube comments. Coming up, I've got 2 more names that we're going to discuss here on the show in hypothetical, realistic trade targets for the Rockets. We're going to get there in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one spot. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the exact same page where you actually place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. And while you're there, take a look at all the different odds available. Check out their parlay builder, check out the different season leaders, or just the outright favorites to win this year's Super Bowl. Right now, the Bills sitting at plus 450. Right behind them, the Eagles at plus 480. And it's a really tight race. You got 2 teams tied for third place, the Chiefs and the Lions both sitting at plus 500. And then in the 5th spot, you got the Ravens at plus 800. So for all those odds, so much more, head on over to FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Today's episode is also brought to you by Built Rewards. If you're a renter, listen up. This is a total game changer. Thanks to Built, you can now earn points on rent payments just like you do with groceries or travel. Paying rent now comes with serious perks, and it's completely free to join. Earn valuable Built points on your rent and everyday spending at no cost to you. Redeem points for flights, hotel stays, and even future rent payments with over 500 airlines and 700,000 different hotels in their program. The possibilities are truly endless. Access unique experiences that are exclusive to Built members. Look, I wish I knew about Built back when I was renting. It would have been amazing to be able to turn my rent into real, tangible rewards. So if you're paying rent, why not make it work for you? Start earning points on rent you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/lockedonnba. That's joinbuilt.com/lockedonnba. Make sure to use our link so that they know that we sent you. Don't wait. Start earning rewards today. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. All right, so these final 2 names that I want to discuss here, I think they provide a couple of different interesting avenues. First and foremost, one of the things that I want you, dear listener, to consider when we explore these hypothetical trades and discuss these possibilities is that part of the team building element, right, for any NBA team and trying to make moves and figuring stuff out is you need to have tradable salary. You need to have pieces that you are willing and able to move in order to level up the rest of your roster. Rafael Stone and the Rockets front office have done a phenomenal job acquiring and piecing together all these contracts in order to be able to make moves to improve the roster. That's why we're talking about close to $41 million in expiring contracts. Because again, in the NBA landscape, expiring contracts have a ton of intrinsic value. They are so useful to teams that want to offload a bad contract or a player that they're not invested in, because it makes it a lot harder if in any trade discussion, you're like, oh yeah, well, we really want that guy that you have, but the only guy that we can trade you is also under contract for like 3+ years. Then the other team is like, we really don't want to take back all that money. The whole reason we're trying to get rid of this guy is we don't want the money on our books. So the Rockets are in a prime position to be able to take advantage of that. However, one area that could be really beneficial to this Rockets team is by kind of, I don't want to say kicking the can down the road, but if you're able to turn some of these current expiring contracts into deals that expire next season, while also bringing in a player that can help contribute to winning right here and now, that's a little bit the best of both worlds. So those are the 2 names that we're going to take a look at really quickly here to round out the show. The first of which, John Collins with the Utah Jazz. Look, this Rockets team has yet to find a true consistent backup 5 this season. They've cycled through Steven Adams, Jock Landale. They've used Jabari as the backup 5. They've done a lot of different things at the backup 5. They don't have a full-time backup 5 answer. And part of that's matchup dependent. Part of that's situational. I get all of that. But John Collins is making $26.5 million this season. He has a player option that he's more than likely, I would assume, to pick up going into this offseason for $26.5 million next season. Same exact amount, so that the contract doesn't go up or down or anything. That could be a really interesting name for the Houston Rockets to bring into the fold and have John Collins play essentially as your backup small ball 5. He's an athletic player. He shoots the ball incredibly well from long distance. He's averaging 43.6% from deep this year. Now, granted, the volume isn't fantastic. It's only 3.3 attempts per game, but imagine a version of the Houston Rockets where coming off the bench as the backup 5, you just downsize a little bit, and even John Collins can play the 4. You can have Jabari at the 5, have that extra length out there. There's a lot of different ways that you could play this. And again, the Rockets could very easily get to John Collins' current salary floor with a combination of, hell, Jock Landale, Jeff Green, Jayshawn Tate gets you there. I know I've thrown Steven Adams' name a couple different times into some of these trades, but as just a quick aside here, I think the Rockets are actually in a really advantageous position. If Steven Adams can kind of showcase himself a little bit and show that he is, back to maybe not his old self, but just playing quality basketball again as a backup to Alperen and Sengun, that could be a candidate the Houston Rockets ultimately sell high on at the deadline. Because if Adams is only playing 12 to 15 minutes of backup basketball, and if the Rockets don't have any intentions of keeping him and re-signing him long-term to be the full-time backup big to Al P this next summer, then there are a billion teams out there that would love to pick up a big man like Steven Adams and either inject him into their starting lineup or have him coming off the bench for them. And that could be a possibility for the Rockets to sell high at the deadline, maybe recoup a future first-round pick or a bunch of seconds or something in order to be able to grease the wheels on other trades down the line. So if you can get away from including Steven Adams in any of these hypothetical trades and utilize the other 4 contracts to make stuff happen, you could isolate the Steven Adams deal and make it its own little bubble and also get back an asset for him, while potentially also still bringing in another quality rotation player, depending on, what you do with that $12.6 million salary. There's a lot of options here for the Rockets. They've got a ton of optionality, and that's what makes it so exciting to think about what they could potentially achieve at this NBA trade deadline. So I like the John Collins idea. I think he would slot in perfectly. He could play some backup 4 minutes. He could play small ball 5. He's athletic. He can run and gun. He can shoot the ball. I think it would work a lot. And the other thing is the Utah Jazz, it's Danny Ainge. You hate dealing with Danny Ainge. Trying to make a trade work with Danny Ainge. He never really wants to make a deal unless he feels like he's, completely running away with highway robbery. So it might just be a moot point trying to negotiate with Ainge, but maybe you get lucky. Maybe you're able to get John Collins for, very little value, a future first or something simple like that. And again, having that contract on the books, it's a little bit of a risk because he might decline that player option if he feels like he can get somewhere else and make a little bit more money or get a longer guarantee on a deal. But I don't know of any team out there that's going to be looking at paying John Collins anywhere north of $26.5 million this upcoming offseason, let alone for multiple seasons. So I would imagine he's probably going to opt into that deal. The other and final name on this list, CJ McCollum. Now, CJ is a little bit long in the tooth, but the New Orleans Pelicans are in a position where they're entertaining offers for everybody. They're looking at offers for Zion. They're looking at offers for CJ. They're looking at offers for pretty much everybody up and down the roster, even DeJounte Murray that they literally just got in a trade, right? First off, I'm going to say no to any DeJounte Murray. Anybody who wants DeJounte Murray on the Rockets, it's basically KPJ part 2 with worse three-point shooting and slightly better defense. Like, no, big emphatic no to DeJounte Murray. CJ McCollum, though, on the other hand, he's making $33.3 million this season. It goes down to $30.6 million next season. And again, he gives the Rockets a little bit of a veteran stabilizing presence, a guy that can be a reliable backup guard and play some high, and has played in his past some high-level basketball. He can handle the rock a little bit. He can take care of the ball. He can knock down shots. And he wouldn't be a guy that you trade for and immediately throw into a large role in this Rockets team. But you could envision a world where the Rockets could trade for CJ McCollum, and then he could get those backup guard minutes that are currently going to Reed Shepherd, Aaron Holiday, a little bit of a mix to Amin Thompson when he's playing the guard spot, anything from like 15 to 20 minutes a night. And realistically, what that does is it gives the Rockets another tradable salary that they can hold on to, that they can do something with this upcoming offseason. And it becomes an expiring contract for next year, right? So it does kick the can down the road a little bit. It gives the Rockets some financial flexibility while also adding a guy who can be an impactful player with playoff experience this season. So I like some of these names on this list. My favorite by far is the Zack LaVine move. I think that would be a no-brainer if the Rockets could ultimately get that one done. Although I do like some of the other names on this list. Honestly, Cam Johnson's probably my least favorite just because he's probably the most costly of any of these names. I want your thoughts, though. I want to see how you feel about some of these moves. What are your personal preferred hypothetical trades for this Houston Rockets team? Who are some of the targets that you'd like to see the Rockets potentially go after this season? Let me know in the YouTube comments. In a future episode, in our next episode, we're actually going to take a look at the Houston Rockets and their pursuit of adding a star-level player to this roster and how this episode kind of feeds into the next one and why it's so important for the Rockets not to jump the gun and make any moves this year that would inhibit their ability to chase a star-level player this upcoming offseason. A couple of the names to very much pay attention to and monitor: De'Aaron Fox and Devin Booker. We're going to talk about those two guys in our next episode, as well as kind of discussing the Houston Rockets timeline for competitiveness and just a bunch of good stuff. So be on the lookout for that. You don't want to miss out on that conversation. As always, thanks so much for checking out the show. Remember, the best way you can help us grow our show is to listen every single day on a podcast platform of your choosing. Like and subscribe on YouTube. Drop us a comment while you're there. Share your hypothetical trades. Also, subscribe to the daily Locked On Rockets newsletter. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.